Welcome everybody. My name is Timo Ylikoski. I'm a customer support consultant here at Adsotech. And in today's webinar, we'll be looking at Winshuttle query, how to use that to build data extraction queries, and also how to use that in combination with the transaction module to enable round-trip processes. So like in previous webinars, I have a couple of slides here just to go a few of the basic things, but then we'll quite quickly jump into Winshuttle Studio and have a look at this in practice, go through a scenario where we build a simple query and a simple round trip solution. So as a brief overview, if you are not familiar with Winshuttle query at all, it is a data extraction tool that can be used to extract live data from SAP to Excel. So you can use it for reporting, for operational or ad hoc reporting, or for mass maintenance templates, which is probably the best use of Winshuttle query. So you can use it on its own for just reporting purposes, or you can combine the use of Winshuttle query with Winshuttle transaction to enable these kinds of round trip processes where you are first extracting data from SAP to Excel, then manipulating the data and then uploading the changes back into SAP. That's where you get the most benefit of both Winshuttle modules, query and transaction. The security is based on SAP table security, so that's also one consideration. You have to have authorization to access those tables. It is optimized for performance, so it has features to automatically adjust and throttle queries, so it shouldn't have any major impact, or the impact on SAP performance will be quite minimal, even if you are doing large data extraction queries. But if you have been using Winshuttle transaction for a while, or if you were with us last week when we looked at long texts, we also looked at how to extract data using the transaction module. So quite often the first question is that, so what's different if you're comparing Winshuttle transaction to Winshuttle query? So if you can read data with just the transaction module, why would you need query? So maybe that's something we can go through first here. A little bit of comparison of what query is in relation to Winshuttle transaction. So like I said, with Winshuttle transaction, you can do some reading, but it's sort of simplified or limited in a way that, for instance, if we are looking at material data, with Winshuttle transaction, you can build a script that goes into MM02 and extracts or reads all the, let's say, the basic data fields and their contents and extracts them from SAP to Excel. But in that scenario, it's fine. You can extract those fields, the data from those fields, but you always have to know the material numbers. You have to specify the material numbers you are interested in. So here's an example, like you want to read the contents of all the basic data fields, but then you have to specify all the material numbers in Excel, because it's all based on the SAP T code. So you have to specify, when you're going into MM02, you have to specify the material number that you are interested in. So that's kind of how, or that will be the limiting factor here. So you have to have one input data, which will be the material number. Whereas with Winshuttle query, you can build more complex queries, so you don't even have to know the actual material numbers if we are still thinking about the material data scenario. So for example, I have put here that you can build a query where you don't know what the exact material numbers are, but you could build a query that searches for materials or extracts materials that have the material number between 1 and 9,999, which were created in the year 2015 and where the material description contains the word equipment and the weight is something like less than 100 kilograms. So you can build more complex queries like this using different logical operators like we have here, like between some number, or where a field contains a certain value, or where the weight is, for instance, less than something or larger than something. So it allows you to build much more complex queries. And then since it's based on the tables, SAP tables, and not the actual T codes, you can query data from multiple different tables to create more complex solutions. So you are not only limited to the data that you have available in, let's say, MM02. You can instead extract data for the material. Then you can look at sales orders where that material was used, and then look at customers who were actually purchasing those materials, and so on. So it allows you to create more complex data extraction queries. It is also a more efficient because you are not going in through the T code in SAP. You are extracting data directly from the table. So if you are doing something more complex, it's more efficient to use query than transaction. And nowadays we can also link queries with transaction scripts, which is actually a fairly new feature introduced in some of the later updates of Winshuttle Studio. So you could technically do all sorts of automation. So you could automatically, or you could run a query to extract data, then have maybe an Excel formula to calculate new values, and then automatically run a transaction script to upload changes back into SAP or something like that. That would be a more complex solution. But for today, what we'll be looking at is something like this. We'll do a couple of steps here. We'll start by going through Winshuttle query. We'll build a simple query, and I'll try to highlight the key concepts there, and also talk a little about what the process of developing query scripts normally is. Then once that's done and tested, we'll run the publishing wizard and look at the Excel add-in, how it then all works there from within Excel. And then as a third final step, we'll quickly create another script in Winshuttle transaction and see what we can do, how we can combine a query script and a transaction script and create an Excel template that allows us to do this kind of round trip processing of material data. So something like this that you see in that illustration here. So we'll be extracting data from SAP using query, then manipulating the data in Excel, and then uploading the changes back into SAP using a transaction script. And for this example, I decided to stick with the material master data. So sort of the same example we've already seen in the past, if you have been with us in the previous webinars. That'll be a nice and a simple example, a fairly straightforward one. But whatever process you are actually working on, there's the steps to create a query, and then maybe a transaction script would be the same. So we are not really focusing on the material data here, but rather the actual process of developing Winshuttle scripts. So the same principles apply to any actual business process you have, or whatever your need is. But at this point, let's just jump into Winshuttle Studio and have a look at what query development looks like in practice. So we'll start in Winshuttle Studio in the new tab, but instead of selecting a transaction script, we'll actually select a query script. Now there are a few different options here. And actually, you can even perform or do a recording with query, which is well, the recording part would be similar to what you do when you are recording transaction scripts. But I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this. It can have some value if you have no idea what the tables are, where the data is stored, because that's maybe one of the, if not the biggest, at least the first challenge you will face when you are working with query. But maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I think the main creation method is the create from tables option here, which allows us to start manually adding tables to our query. And first thing we'll need to do is log on to SAP, like so. There aren't really that many options here when it comes to creating queries. Here you can select the data type, but we'll stick to Excel. So I can just click on create script, which will then shortly take us to the query main view, the so-called workspace, which looks like this. So the first thing you'll need to do here is to add some tables. What are the tables we want to extract the data from? And like I said, that can be one big challenge if you're working with something that you are not too familiar with. If you don't already know what the names of the tables are, where the data is stored, it can be a little bit challenging. But then again, if you are already familiar with the SAP table structure, or you've been working a lot with the data browser in SAP, going to SE16 and looking at table data there, then this or very, very natural and easy to use. But let's look at a few options we have here regarding finding the tables. On the right-hand side, the panel here, we have a few different selections. Maybe we'll start with the data dictionary, which is one option. So there is this kind of dictionary that lists different SAP modules here. So if the plan is to build something for extracting material data, we could have a look at here under materials management, expand that group, and then start looking at what kind of tables we have listed here. And that might be something that, okay, here we have material data table, and we could add a table to our workspace from here. So that's something you can use to browse for tables. There's a table search here that you could use, or if you are looking for something like material, let's try material data and say that we look for that search string in the table description. Let's see how many. Okay, in this case we were lucky. There's only one result that shows up here at the bottom of the screen, so we could add the Mara table to our query here by clicking on the button here. So that's another way you can do a search. Or the quickest way, if you already know the table name, you can simply type it in here in the quick add box and click on add to workspace to add that table to your query workspace. So if you have no idea what the name of the table is, you could try the recording thing. It would allow you to record something like MM02. You do something there, then exit out, and then Winshuttle query will automatically pick up all the related tables. The problem with that is that it usually picks up way too many tables than what is necessary. So you get a lot of extra data because that's just due to the SAP data structure. There's so many different tables and they're all linked together. So it can be a bit of a mess. But what you can do with that is maybe do a recording and see if you can figure out from that what is the table, then make note of that table, then come back and start with a new query from scratch. Do like what we did here, start with a blank query and manually add that table. That might be something that actually is useful. Because I would say the preferred or recommended method is using this kind of manual way to manually add the tables and only the tables that you actually need in the query. You don't want to have anything really extra here. And of course, one good tool, as always, when you need to figure something out, you can look it up on Google. Usually it takes you to the SAP developer network, where you also usually find very good discussions regarding where table names, where data is stored in SAP. So that can be helpful. But here we now have one table in our workspace, which we can then move around and resize here as needed. So let's say we want to pick some fields here. We have these two checkboxes which we will be using to select which data fields, what data we want to extract from that field, from SAP to Excel. And then the criteria selection is what we use to select certain fields to be used as sort of search filters, search criteria. So let's first I'll select material number as an output field, so I want to extract material numbers. Then let's say we'll do something again with the weight values. That would be a straightforward example. So you can scroll through this list, which then again, depending on the table, can be quite long. There could be dozens or a couple of hundred fields even in each table. You can right click on the header here, which will allow you to sort the fields by name or by type or whatever, which sometimes is helpful which sometimes helps you find the field you are looking for. Or you can use this little search box here. So if I type in weight here, it will filter out all the other fields that don't have the search term weight related in them. So now it brings up only the weight related fields here in our view. So I could pick from here. Let's say I'm gonna do net weight, gross weight, and weight unit. So I'll pick those as my output fields, and then we can clear the search filter here. Go back to the original view. And while you are selecting fields, they also appear here in the lists view. So you see output fields, those are the fields that I selected as output fields. So those will be the fields, the data we will be extracting from SAP to Excel. Now, I don't want to extract every single material that is in the Winshuttle test SAP system. That would be quite a lot. So I want to maybe limit that somehow. So for that, we have the criteria selection. So let's first try something simple, and then we'll add on top of that. But start with this, just to make sure that our query works. Then we can further refine our query later on. But first, I'll just check the checkbox, the criteria checkbox for material number. So as you can see, these are not mutually exclusive. A field can be both an output field and a criteria field. Criteria field just means that we want to somehow limit the data extraction based on the material number. So in this screen, there's really nothing. We just use the checkboxes to select fields, select output fields, and select criteria fields. Then we can move to the next step. So usually you work from left to right. You start from the workspace, add tables, select fields. Then you move to the next step, which is the criteria tab here. Under this tab, all the fields that we have selected as criteria fields will appear. We only have one at the moment, which is the material number. So here we can specify a search, sort of a search condition or search filter, whatever you want to call it. And we can use various logical operators here. So we could say that material number needs to be larger than something between a set of values, and there's some multiple different values or operators here that you can use. Let's try something like, let's do like. So this would allow, because I know all the sort of test materials that we've been using here at Adsotec, they all start with the letters ADS. So I could say that the material number needs to be ADS and then something. So I could put in an asterisk here. So that would be a search filter. I don't want it to extract every single material from SAP, just all the materials starting with the letters ADS. That would be a good maybe starting point. Then I can move on to the Runtime tab, which allows us to do sort of quick testing without actually creating a proper Excel template and so on. This allows us to test and see if our query works at all. So there's a couple of buttons down here. We see the search filter or the criteria we selected. It appears up here. Then what we can do is maybe number of entries is something you can start with. Click on that button. Query will basically run a sort of simplified version of that query. It's not going to actually extract the results. It'll just give us a count of how many records would match these search criteria. So this means that there are 2,300 something materials starting with the letters ADS. And then in addition to that, you can do a preview run, which is also not a full, it doesn't extract all the 2,000 something records, but it's limited to the first 100 matching records. So it gives you a sample of the data down here. So this is a good way to first test your query to see is it first of all, is it actually extracting anything? And then secondly, is it actually extracting data that we are interested in? And then you can scroll down here. If I scroll to the bottom, you can see that it lists the first 100 matching records. This is good for testing. So if you are working with massive amounts of data, you don't want to, every time you test, you probably don't want to extract tens of thousands of records. The first 100 records is good. It'll be faster and it'll give you an idea if your query works. Now, if this was it, if I was happy with this step, I would move, or my query, I could move to the mapping step, which is basically where you build the Excel template. But let's not go there quite yet. And this is also how I recommend you work with query. You start with something simple, add one table, add a couple of fields, add some criteria, and then come here and test your script, do the preview, and then go back, because you can always go back to the criteria fields or all the way back to the workspace, and then add more fields or add more tables, and then test them one step at a time. So if you're working with something complex that involves extracting data from 25 different tables, I wouldn't recommend adding all the 25 tables in the beginning and then doing everything and then testing. It's usually better to work one step at a time and iterate on it, start slowly build up your query, because then it's easier to pinpoint if there's some mistake and your query doesn't work. Then it's easier to figure out where it failed. You just go back one step. But if you add a dozen tables, then it might be difficult to find out where the problem lies. Well, let's do something else. Let's see what kind of other criteria, conditions, or operators we have and how we can use them. So let's look at our weight value. So maybe we can do something with those, test those. So we could say, I want to also use the weight values as criteria fields also. So I can just check those, then go back to the criteria tab. And as you see, now we have three different fields visible here. We have the old material number criteria that we added in the first place. Now we have the net weight and gross weight. So here I could say that I could have like a condition or a search criteria that the net weight has to be something over 50 and the gross weight has to be something less than 500 or something. So you can combine these search criteria here, and then you would go back to the runtime runtime tab where you can do the preview to test your conditions. I think there should be materials that fall into that. I think here it displays this in a. We'll have to check that when we actually extract this. It might be in a US format with the 1000 separator there, but we'll focus on that later. But the idea is here that you can move back and forth between these, select different fields and test them one at a time. If I go back to the criteria, we had a look at this. So there's quite a few of these logical operators that you can use. I don't know what would be, maybe we could have a look at something like between, which allows you then to specify a range of material numbers. We could say ADS 100 and that the material has to be between 100 and 999 and so on. And let's actually go, let's not do that. Let's leave that as like, and we'll go back to the workspace and maybe let's add another table. I don't think playing around with the weight values is that interesting, and I don't even know, maybe I don't even want them in my script. Maybe I can come back here and remove the criteria checkbox from the gross weight and net weight. All right, let's try adding another table. Let's try the search just to see if that works. So if I want to find material descriptions and run the search, it finds the MAKT table here, which I can add to my workspace from here. the end result would have been saved. I could have added it from this quick add box by typing in the table name MAKT and pressing the add to workspace. But just to show how that works, I used the search this time. Let's put the list view back here. Now we have two tables in our query, and you can move these around, and you can see that Winshuttle automatically connects or joins the tables together because these are connected tables. So quite often you don't really need to worry about the joins. They are more often than not, they are automatically, or the tables, connected tables are automatically joined together correctly in Winshuttle query. But now let's say I want to take the material description. I want to read or extract that from SAP. So let's say I want to take the material description from this table. I'll simply click that, and then let's go back to criteria. Let's limit this a little bit. I think we have something like this in our, so we can do between 4001, 4099. Let's see what kind of data we get. Then come back here to the runtime view and do the preview again. Let's see, do we get what kind of data we get here? Okay, so the preview results here now are different. Now we can see that it now lists the material description short text field here as well in our results. But now if we look at this material number, you can see that ADS 4001 there's two matching records for that one. 4002 is also twice here. So you get, first it seems you get duplicates, but that's not actually the case. It's because there are multiple different descriptions for different languages. So we can't really see here because they're actually all in English, but in a real case, this would be maybe English and this would be some other language. I can't tell because I don't have the language key selected. But we could also extract to see what language this is supposed to be. But that could be something we want to maybe use as a criteria field. Maybe I'm only interested in the English language descriptions. So I could go back to the workspace and select from the material description, select the language key as a criteria. It doesn't have to be an output field. If it's not an output field, it's not extracted and it's not visible in the results, but that's okay. Maybe that's something we want in this case. We just want to limit the language by the language key, but we don't really want to then show that in the results. So now I selected the language key as a criteria field, and then again go back to the criteria, and now we have our language key here. So we could say that language key has to equal E for English. That could be a search criteria. Another way to control this is that now if I just leave it like this, it means every time a user runs the script, it'll look a little bit different than when at the end we'll run this from Excel. But basically this will be a field where they will have the pre-filled value E, but the user can come and change this to anything they want, whatever language key, F for French, for instance. But if we want to make sure that this query only extracts the English language descriptions, we can, from the criteria tab, we can change this to a fixed value. So this will sort of hard code it so that it will use the language key E, but the user can see that it's using the language key E, but there's no way to then adjust this. They can't change it here. So and let's do the preview run to here. The preview run here just to make sure that it's actually now working correctly. And now we only get one result per material because there's only one English language description, and the user cannot change that. And there are other different ways. You could say that it's user defined, and then actually this allows the person to do a sort of a SAP lookup to look at proper what are the valid values in SAP for this field. So even if they don't know what's a correct language key, they could click on this button, which will then actually connect to SAP and bring up this this language key selection, and then I could select something from here, select Italian language, and then we could use that to, or the user could use that to select a valid value. So that's also sometimes useful. So it'll help the users if they need to select or use a value for a search criteria, but they don't know or remember what are the valid values, what kind of options they have, or so. So that's something they can do. And you could also specify that the values are in an external list, or they could be in an Excel file. Maybe it doesn't make that much sense for the language key. Let's just say the language is E for English, and let's make that a fixed value, just so we have one of those. But you could say that instead of having the material numbers listed as a range here, you could say that the material numbers are listed in an Excel file. Maybe you already have an Excel file of all of the materials you want to extract the data from, and then you could use the in operator here to configure query to look for material data based on material numbers in an external file, a text file or an Excel file. So there are a lot of options, and this actually can get quite complicated, because you can also combine multiple rules. So for instance, I could say that the material number has to be between this range or something else, but not a specific number in that range, but something else. So it could be like between 4001 and 4099, but not between or not equal to 4055. So maybe we're going to exclude something. That's a pretty silly example, but anyway, the idea is that you can combine multiple search conditions here, which then allows you to create very complex queries. But I think the most often used ones are something like between and the like operator we looked at first. So you want to find the specific values, specific materials, specific records, or records matching some in a certain range, or matching some criteria. But that's the way you would go about building queries. You usually go back and forth between these. But let's in this case, let's keep it relatively simple. We'll leave it as is. We have just a couple of fields. Well, we actually, let's see. We have material number, the weight, net weight, gross weight, weight unit, and the description. And we'll use a between operator. So we're only interested in materials that fall into this range. That's fine. So let's say I'm now happy with my query. I have been testing it here, looks okay. Then the final step, we move on to the mapper phase, which is more or less identical to what you do when you build templates for Winshuttle transaction scripts. So looks pretty much the same as the transaction mapper view, where you have a blank Excel template at the bottom, and then you have the output fields that you selected when you were building your query. And then you could start by mapping them. I'll actually put the log column to the beginning, because then we'll have the log for the query at the beginning, then we'll have the fields, and then later on we'll have a log column for the transaction script at the end. So I could then just drag and drop these down in whatever order I prefer. I actually quite like this. I think this is a logical order, that we have net weight, gross weight, weight unit, and material description. Those would be the fields for my query mapped to Excel here, and that's the mapping part done. So the challenge here lies in figuring out what the tables are. Once you know that tables where the data is stored, it's relatively simple once you sort of get familiar with the user interface and understand how to work with the criteria and so on. And then it's not too challenging to then build the query, and the setting up the Excel template is fairly straightforward, because you are just dragging and dropping the fields here to Excel columns, and then you are done. So at this point, I want to save my Excel template and my query. But in this case, I actually want to rename these to something. Let's call these, the data file I will call I will call it material underscore basic data, and I'll just put in something here, February 2020 basic data, like so. That will be my Excel file. And then I'll also rename the query script to, let's call this material basic data query, because this is then important, because once we publish them to Excel, and I also copy and paste that to the script title. So the file name and the script title will be the same. Material basic data query, because then later on it'll be easier to differentiate when we have an upload script and a query script, so we can know for sure which one is which. So we'll save it with that name, because that name will then be, that is what will be visible in the Excel add-in for the end user once we publish this script. So let's save that, and then move on to the Run tab, where we can do one final test to make sure this is actually working. So I will click on the Run button here, and it will bring up this runtime variable wizard, which contains the criteria fields we had selected in our query. So we have the material number range. I can still adjust this if I want to, but that's fine. I want those materials and only the English language descriptions. So let's see if we actually can extract these from SAP to Excel. So there we go. 77 matching records were found, and looks all right here. Now I will clear this data, and so let's delete that. So we have a sort of a blank template. I could then further fine tune this, maybe change some of the headers if I wanted to, or so on. But what I want to do now is do the publishing. I think we already tested this with the transaction script earlier, so it's the same when you are publishing query scripts. So what this does is if you're not familiar with the publishing process, it embeds the Winshuttle script into the Excel file, which is sort of a simple wizard here where we just select the name of the script and what the data file is, but we want to use the template we just built, so we don't have to change anything here. I will just click publish, and Winshuttle will embed the query script into the Excel file, which means that now I could actually close Winshuttle Studio here and open up the Excel template we just created. So it's called the Material Basic Data February 2020. So now as a runner user, I can run the query directly from within Excel by using the Winshuttle Excel add-in. So I can click on the little Winshuttle Run tab here to open up, first to log on to Winshuttle, to then to display all the Winshuttle related buttons here. And then I can run my query from here. So here's where it shows the name of the query. I labeled it as Material Basic Data Query, so I can run the query directly from inside Excel. And I'll need to log on to SAP here first. But then when running it from inside Excel, you get the same criteria wizard here, or the runner user would get this. And then click OK, and then it'll run the script. So this is something we already tested in Studio. Just to quickly go through how it works when publishing and using the Excel add-in. But the results are the same, so that works fine. So that would be part one of our round trip solution completed. So let's clear that data. We'll save it as an empty template, because we're going to continue working on this same Excel file. So now we have one, and maybe that's fine. Maybe you don't need a round trip solution. Maybe you just want to extract data, and then this would be it. This is what the end result would be. You'd build a query, test it in Winshuttle Studio, then publish it, and then you would end up with an Excel template that has the query script embedded into it. So all I would now need to do is send this to to the Winshuttle runner users, or put this on a SharePoint site or a network share, however you want to distribute this to the runner users. And then they could just each come and pick up the template and start running the queries if they wanted to use this basically as a report to extract data from SAP. That's fine. But today we want to also have a look at how to combine this with a transaction script to first be able to extract data and then upload the changes back into SAP, because we now only have part one done here. We've done the query part, so we now just need to enable the transaction part. So I will go ahead and close my Excel and reopen Winshuttle Studio. We'll need to do a quick recording in MM02, but that'll be similar to what we did in the initial introductory webinar. So hopefully you are familiar with that process, because I'm not going to get into too much detail regarding transaction and recording. If you're not, you can go back and view the recording of that introductory webinar, or look at any of our training materials to see how to record Winshuttle transaction scripts. So the first part, the recording part, will be pretty much identical to what we did in the past webinars. We'll record a quick MM02 script where we just go into MM02 and we'll update the whatever fields we had in our query. We had the weight measurements, weight unit, and the material description. So I'll just do a quick MM02 recording. So this will be, hopefully this part is already familiar to all of you. So we can just go through the recording quickly. Then we'll just make a small adjustment when we do the mapping, and then hopefully we'll have a nice simple round trip solution. So here we go, and I'll use one of the same materials. I'll use the 4001 we used that we had in the Excel report or in the query results. So I'll go into the basic data one view for this material, and I'll change something. I'll change the weight value. I'll change the gross weight and net weight. Again, I don't really have to change anything. I can delete the value, put in the same value. That just ensures that that field is captured in the recording. So I'm going to take gross weight, net weight, weight unit, and let's change the description. I'll just leave it like that. So we made changes to the description, the weights, and the weight unit, and that's it. We'll exit out and save. So this is all hopefully familiar to you. There's nothing really changes here. We are just recording a simple MM02 script using, and we chose the same fields we had in the query. So we are imagining that in this process, we want to first extract the weight values from SAP using a query, and then make some changes to those values, and then upload the changes back into SAP. So now, before we start mapping, and that's really the only difference to what we did before, is now instead of starting from scratch and building a brand new Excel file for this, I want to use the existing template I just created when I created the query. So here we have this little button here that says open a different data file, which allows us to open an existing Excel template and use that for our MM02 script. So I will select the material basic data template that I just created a few minutes ago and open it here. We'll unlock the headers also so we can modify it here. So that's the query template that we just created. And now we'll map the MM02 fields to this template. So we can use these same fields here. So for instance, we already have material number here in column B. So we'll use that and just drag and drop it over the material number field for our MM02 script. And then just go through this net weight, map it to the net weight field, gross weight likewise, weight unit, and material description goes over there. So we map all those fields to the same Excel template. And let's put the log column for this script, let's put that at the end. So we'll have the query log in the front and the transaction log in the back. That's all a matter of preference. The log columns can be wherever. They don't need to be like so. They could be all at the end, all at the beginning, or somewhere further away in the Excel sheet, whatever you prefer. I just chose this this setup, and that's basically it. Now the MM02 script that we just recorded, the transaction script, it's now mapped to the same Excel file where we already have the query script published. So now let's save these. The data file name, we'll leave it like so. That's the name, material basic data, but we will rename the transaction script to something like material basic data, let's say update. So that way, when we publish this, then we can easily differentiate between the query and the update script, because they both will be in the same template after we publish this. So let's save those files. Now, actually, you would want to test, of course, test your MM02 script here to do a run, see if you can update these values. But we are feeling adventurous today, so we'll just go straight ahead and publish this script also without testing, which is not something I would normally recommend, but we're going to take a risk, assume that this is going to work fine. So we can do the publishing here in the transaction. So now what we are doing is we are publishing the transaction script to the same Excel template that already has a query script published in it. So there's really no limit to how many scripts can be published into an Excel template. There could be multiple transaction scripts, multiple query scripts, all published to the same Excel template. So let's see what happens if I publish this into the same Excel template. And now let's go ahead. Let's close Studio and open up our material basic data Excel template in actual proper Excel. So now again, this could be now what it looks like from the runner user point of view. So the runner user, all they need is this Excel template. They can access the Winshuttle related tools and features from the Winshuttle Excel add-in by first logging into Winshuttle here. At this point, basically what it does, it checks your license, that you have a valid Winshuttle license. And once that check is complete, it'll show you the Winshuttle related tools. And now let's have a look at this drop-down menu here. Now, as you see, there are two different scripts here. And now this is where some kind of naming convention is useful to have, so that you can see what script does what, especially if you're publishing multiple different scripts to your template. You want the runner users to be able to differentiate between the script files and to know what each script is supposed to do just by looking at the name alone. But also the little icon here displays whether it's a query script or a transaction script. But now this is well, we haven't fully tested this, but we are confident that this will be fine. So all that is left to do is now test the full round trip process by starting with the query. I don't need to adjust any of the settings here. We'll just run the query. First log on to our SAP system. Then that will bring up the same old runtime variable wizard. Let's say we want to limit this to something. Or actually, let's do it like that. We'll use something else to further limit our selection. So we'll extract all the materials in that range. And there we go. Now we got some material data in our Excel template, 77 records. So now that would be the first part done. We extracted data from SAP to Excel. Now we would want to make some changes to maybe the process, or the whole point of this was to look for some errors in master data, correct the errors, and upload the changes back into SAP. I could just start going through all the different materials here, but now since this is a standard Excel file, I can use whatever Excel features I have. I could do a search and replace to find certain values and change them to something else. I could use Excel formulas to change the data here, manipulate that, or just use Excel filters. So let's turn on filters for this. And then we could say that we want to filter out some records here. Maybe look at, well, in this case, I don't know if there's what would make sense, but I'll just pick some. I'll just pick a few of the first ones here. I want to maybe those are the materials I want to update or change the weight values for. So I can use filters to filter out unwanted results and sort of drill down on the records that I am really interested in. So like I said, this is a standard Excel file, so I have all the normal Excel tools here. So now it depends on how familiar you are with Excel, how creative you can get. You can do all sorts of stuff in Excel. And now let's say I want to change let's change all these to something. I'll just pick some random values, 5 and 6 kilograms, and I want to say that all of these materials should have, maybe there was an error in the data and the weight values were incorrect in SAP, so I want to correct that error here and then upload the changes back into SAP. I'll leave the descriptions, maybe I'll leave them as is. They're fine, let's assume so. So now all that is left to do is to upload the new weight values back into SAP. So I'll need to, at this point, switch to the transaction script, the material basic data update script, which then changes the layout of the Excel add-in a little bit, because there are different kinds of buttons and tools related to that script, because this is a transaction script. So there are a few different buttons here, but these are more or less identical to the buttons that you see in Winshuttle Studio when you are working on transaction scripts and testing them. One thing I want to do before I run it is that by default, if you look at the run options here, this would process all the data, all the rows starting from row 2 and all the way to the end of the sheet, which would mean that it would process all 77 records in my Excel, which is not what I want to do. I want to only update these 5 materials. But for that, I have this button here that allows me to select that, to say that instead of the whatever values we have specified here as the start and end row, I want to say that I want to only update the material or the values for the filtered records in my Excel sheet. So I'm going to say filtered rows. So that's also something you can use to if you are using filters, it makes it easier, so you don't have to process everything. But other than that, I don't really want to do anything else, but just run my script, and hopefully we'll get a success message here in the log column saying something like the material was changed, data saved, like so. So there we go. Our round trip process is complete. The changes, the new values were uploaded back into SAP. And now I could clear the records here and run the query again and see if the new values were updated and so on. But we'll skip that part. We'll assume that the changes were successfully uploaded. But basically, that's how you can combine query scripts with Winshuttle transaction scripts, and you just basically work on them individually. You probably normally first build the query script, work on it individually, then publish it, then start working on the transaction script and publish it to the same Excel file, the Excel template. And this is what the end result will be like. You'll have one single Excel template that allows the users to extract data and then also upload the changes back into SAP. So that's all I had for today. That's a very brief primer into the world of Winshuttle query and round trip processes as a whole. But hopefully this was a good thing for you. Or gave you at least an idea of what kind of things you can do with query and how you could combine query and transaction to enable this kind of round trip thinking. As usual, you'll find some additional reading and videos on the agitech.com/training site, where we will also be posting all the webinar recordings. So the recording for this session will also be available there tomorrow probably. And if you have any questions, you can contact our support by email. That's all I had for today. I hope you enjoyed this session, and thank you all for your time today.